Alexandra Grant stepped out of the car, holding Keanu Reeves' hand gently. They had arrived at a big event in Los Angeles filled with celebrities, flashing cameras, and curious eyes. Alexandra was calm, like always. She wore a beautiful long dress, silver and soft, that matched her natural gray hair. She didn't try to hide her age. She didn't wear heavy makeup. She didn't try to look like someone else. She simply looked like herself. Elegant, real, but the people around them. They were different. As the couple walked across the red carpet, cameras started clicking. The photographers shouted Keanu's name, asking him to turn, to smile, to pose. They were excited to see him. He was a beloved Hollywood actor, someone known for being kind and private. But when they noticed the woman beside him, some stopped smiling, some whispered to each other. A few even raised their eyebrows in surprise. Is that his girlfriend? One woman whispered to another, "She looks old enough to be his mom." Another said, half laughing, "She doesn't even dye her hair." Someone else added, they thought they were speaking quietly, but their words floated through the air like smoke. Alexandra didn't hear every word, but she could feel the stares. She could feel the judgment. It pressed on her shoulders like a heavy coat. Still, she kept walking. Her hand didn't let go of Keanu's. They reached the entrance of the grand ballroom. Inside, chandeliers sparkled above round tables dressed in white and gold. Waiters moved around with trays of drinks. The air smelled of perfume, wine, and rich food. Everyone was dressed in their best tight gowns, glittering jewelry, polished shoes. And everyone was watching. Some guests smiled politely when Alexandra and Keanu walked in, but others gave cold nods or turned away. At one table, a group of young women started whispering and giggling the moment they sat down. One of them, wearing a bright red dress, leaned toward Alexandra with a fake smile. "You're very brave," she said, her voice sweet but sharp. "I wish I had your courage to stop dyeing my hair too. But I guess you've accepted aging." Her friends laughed quietly. Alexandra smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. She didn't want to start a scene. She was used to people being uncomfortable around her. She had faced this before. But something about tonight felt worse. Maybe because she was with Keanu. Maybe because it was so public that Keanu heard the comment. He didn't laugh. He didn't smile. He simply looked at the woman in red, then turned to Alexandra and gently brushed a piece of hair from her face. "You look stunning," he said to her, loudly enough for the others to hear. His voice was calm but firm, like he was reminding her and everyone else of the truth. Alexandra felt her throat tighten. She nodded and looked down, pretending to focus on her drink. But the whispers didn't stop. At the next table, a man in a sharp suit said, "That's Keanu Reeves? You'd think he'd be with someone younger." His date slapped his arm and whispered, She's right there." Alexandra tried to stay strong. She laughed at small jokes. She nodded during conversations. But inside, she felt like she was shrinking. The night that was supposed to be special was quickly becoming a nightmare. She wasn't angry. She was hurt. She had never wanted fame. She wasn't chasing attention. She was an artist. A thinker. She loved words and colors, not flashing lights. But because she loved Keanu and he loved her, she had chosen to be here, with him, in this world of red carpets and cameras. And now she was paying the price. Still, Keanu never let go of her hand. Not once. Every time someone looked at her strangely, he squeezed her fingers gently. He smiled at her often, as if to say, "Ignore them, you're perfect." He didn't care about what the others thought. He saw her soul. He saw her mind. He saw the years they had shared together, the books they had read, the art they had created. And to him, that meant more than any wrinkle, any hair color, or any shallow opinion in the room. But Alexandra wasn't made of stone. The stares, the laughter, the cruel whispers, they all left small cracks in her heart. She didn't cry. Not yet, but she felt tired. Tired of pretending not to care. As the music played and the speeches began, she sat quietly, holding her drink with both hands. Keanu leaned close and whispered something into her ear. She smiled this time for real, because while the room had tried to humiliate her, Keanu made her feel safe, and she had no idea what he was about to do next, or how it would silence them all. The ballroom was filled with laughter, soft music, and the sound of glasses clinking. Everyone was dressed in their finest clothes, acting polite on the surface. But under all that shine and sparkle, there was something else in the air. Judgment. Quiet, sharp and heavy. Alexandra sat beside Keanu at a long table near the front of the room. It was supposed to be an honor to sit close to the stage, to be seen by everyone. But for Alexandra, it felt more like sitting in a spotlight she didn't ask for. Every movement she made, every smile, every word, people were watching her. Not in a kind way, not in a curious way, but like she didn't belong. She tried her best to look relaxed. She sipped from her glass. She nodded when people spoke to her. But deep inside, her chest felt tight. Her fingers were cold. At the same table, another woman turned toward Keanu. She had shiny blonde hair and perfect makeup, the kind that looked like it took hours. She leaned a little too close to him, ignoring Alexandra completely. "Keanu," she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, "you look amazing tonight. I almost didn't recognize you. It's been so long." Keanu gave her a polite nod, but his hand stayed on Alexandra's. The woman looked at Alexandra and said, "And you must be his agent?" The table fell silent. Alexandra blinked. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "No," Keanu said softly, his voice like a knife wrapped in silk. "She's the love of my life." The woman's face froze. She smiled again, but this time it was awkward. "Oh," she said, her eyes wide. "Of course." Alexandra looked down at her plate. She didn't want Keanu to feel uncomfortable. She didn't want to ruin the night. But why did people keep acting like she was invisible? Like she wasn't good enough to sit beside him? A waiter came by to refill their drinks. He smiled at Keanu, then paused when he looked at Alexandra. "You look different," the waiter said before he caught himself. "I mean natural." It wasn't a compliment. It was the kind of comment that hides an insult behind a fake smile. Alexandra nodded politely. She was used to it now. People always wanted her to explain herself. Why didn't she dye her hair? Why didn't she wear more makeup? Why didn't she try to look younger? She could have said 1,000 things. That she loved her gray hair. That she believed beauty came from the soul. That aging was not a curse, but a gift. But she didn't say any of that. Not tonight. She just wanted the night to end. Across the room, Alexandra noticed a group of people looking at her table. They were whispering again. One man whispered something to his friend and pointed at Alexandra. His friend looked and laughed. Keanu saw it too. He sat up straighter. His jaw tightened. His hand squeezed Alexandra's gently. He didn't say anything, but she could feel something changing in him. He hated this. He had brought Alexandra because he loved her. Because she was smart, kind, talented, and full of quiet strength. He didn't care about the red carpets, the shallow compliments, or the empty fame. He cared about truth. And Alexandra was the truest person he had ever met. A man. At the far end of their table, raised a glass for a toast. He stood up and said loudly, "To beauty and youth, may it last forever." Many people laughed and clapped. It seemed like a joke, but Alexandra felt the sting of it like a slap. Keanu didn't clap. He looked around the room, watching the fake smiles, the silent judgments, the sharp eyes that looked through the woman he loved like she was nothing. He had seen a lot in his life: pain, loss, cruelty. But this quiet cruelty, this small daily meanness, it made his blood boil. He turned to Alexandra and whispered, "You don't deserve this." She looked at him with tired eyes. "It's okay," she said softly. "I'm used to it." "No," Keanu said, his voice stronger now. "It's not okay." Alexandra saw something in his eyes, something firm and serious. She didn't know what he was planning, but she could tell he was done staying silent. She tried to calm him. "Please," she said, "don't make a scene." But Keanu shook his head, still holding her hand. "It's not a scene. It's the truth, and they need to hear it." Alexandra's heart beat faster. She had never seen him like this, not angry but awake. Awake to how deeply people could hurt someone just for being different. The music kept playing. The guests kept laughing. But Keanu was quiet now, thinking, watching, planning. Something told Alexandra. The whole room was about to be shocked. That night, after the event, Alexandra sat on the edge of her hotel bed. Her hands were in her lap. Her dress was still perfect, her makeup still soft and clean, but her heart felt heavy. The evening was over, but the weight of the whispers and fake smiles was still with her. Her phone was buzzing again and again. Messages, notifications, photos. She didn't want to check. But curiosity won. She opened a social media app and her heart dropped. There were pictures of her and Keanu walking. The red carpet, sitting at the table, holding hands. The photos were everywhere. But the comments were the worst part. Some were kind. "She looks so graceful. Love this couple." But others were cruel. "She looks like his grandmother. What is he thinking? This is who Keanu is dating? Seriously?" Alexandra's eyes filled with tears. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She didn't want fame or attention. She was just being herself, natural, honest, peaceful. But to the internet, that wasn't enough. The world wanted something fake. Something younger. Something shiny. She put the phone face down and sat very still. Her chest felt tight, like a heavy knot was stuck in her heart. She didn't cry out loud. The tears just slid down her cheeks, one after another. Keanu walked in quietly from the other room. He had just finished a call. When he saw her, he froze. He walked over and knelt in front of her. Gently, he took her hands in his. "Hey," he said softly. "What's wrong?" She shook her head. "It's nothing," she whispered. "I'm just tired." Keanu tilted his head. "No, it's not nothing. You're hurting." She didn't want to say it. She didn't want to sound weak. But her voice finally broke. "They're laughing at me, Keanu. They think you deserve someone better. Someone prettier, younger. I read the comments. I saw the jokes." Keanu didn't say anything for a moment. He just looked at her face, her beautiful, real face. He wiped a tear from her cheek and kissed her forehead. "Don't believe them," he said. "They don't know you. They don't know us." "I know," she said. "But it still hurts." He nodded. "I know it does." There was silence in the room. Just the sound of traffic outside and the quiet hum of the heater. Then Keanu stood up. He picked up her phone from the table and stared at the screen for a moment. He didn't flinch. He had seen hate online before. But this time, it was different. This time, it was personal. "They don't get to talk about you like this," he said, his voice low and serious. Alexandra looked up at him. "What will you do?" "I'm going to say something," he said. "Not just to defend you, but to tell the truth. No drama," she said quickly. "Please." He smiled gently. "No drama, just honesty." The next morning, the story was everywhere. More photos had spread overnight. Gossip channels and entertainment blogs had picked it up. Keanu's date shocks fans. Twitter roasts Keanu's new love. Is this the woman stealing Keanu's heart? It was ugly. And it was getting worse. Alexandra tried to stay quiet. She focused on her work, on her art, but the world wouldn't let go. That afternoon, a well-known celebrity host invited Keanu to do a live interview. It was for a popular morning show, watched by millions. Keanu said yes. He didn't wear a fancy suit. He didn't bring a team of people with him. He just walked onto the stage, calm and quiet, and took his seat. The host smiled brightly. So Keanu, the internet is buzzing. People are surprised by your date at the gala. Do you want to say anything about the reaction? Keanu looked into the camera. Then he said, in a calm and steady voice, "Yes, I want to say something." The host looked surprised. Keanu continued, "Her name is Alexandra Grant. She is the most intelligent, kind, and talented person I know. She's not just my partner, she's my inspiration." There was silence on set. He went on, "I've seen people making fun of her because of her hair, her age, her style. And to them, I say this. If all you see is what someone looks like, you're missing the whole point of love." People watching at home stopped scrolling. They stopped sipping their coffee. Something about Keanu's voice so soft, so real touched them. "I didn't fall in love with Alexandra because of how she looks," he said. "I love who she is. And if you knew her like I do, you'd feel lucky just to sit next to her." Bye. The time the clip ended, the internet had changed. People started reposting the video, praising him, apologizing, saying they were wrong. And Alexandra, sitting alone in the kitchen, watching from her laptop. She didn't feel humiliated anymore. She felt seen, she felt loved, and she had no idea that this was only the beginning of something even bigger. After the interview, everything changed. Keanu's words spread like wildfire. People around the world watched the video again and again. Some cried, some felt ashamed. Others simply listened and learned. In a time where most celebrities stayed quiet, Keanu spoke with honesty. He didn't shout, he didn't insult anyone. He simply stood by Alexandra with love and truth. And that truth hit people hard. The same people who had laughed at Alexandra's hair were now silent. The ones who said she looked like Keanu's mother had nothing left to say. Slowly, their cruel words disappeared from the comments. But it wasn't just the online world that changed. It was the people around them. Calls came in. Emails, letters, messages. Journalists who once ignored Alexandra now wanted interviews. Magazines who once cut her out of photos now asked to put her on their covers. But Alexandra wasn't chasing fame. She didn't want to be in the spotlight just because of one interview. Still, something inside her had changed too. For so long, she had stayed quiet when people judged her. She had kept her head down and smiled through the insults. But now she felt stronger, because someone she loved had stood up for her. And not just in private, but in front of the entire world. A few days later, Alexandra went out for a quiet walk. She wore simple clothes, no makeup, and her silver hair was tied loosely behind her head. A woman at a cafe saw her and smiled. "You're beautiful," the woman said. "Thank you for being real." Alexandra smiled back. For the first time in a long time, she felt seen for who she really was. But while the world was calming down, Keanu was still feeling something inside, something heavy. He couldn't forget how Alexandra had looked that night, sitting at the edge of the bed, trying not to cry. That image stayed in his mind. He started calling people behind the scenes, not for revenge, but because he was tired of the way people in his world Hollywood treated women, especially women who didn't fit their narrow image of beauty. Spoke to producers, directors, agents, magazine editors. He said things people were too afraid to say. Why do you only cast women under 30 in romantic roles? Why do your magazines Photoshop every wrinkle? Why do you tell women they must hide who they are to be accepted? Some people listened. Others didn't. But Keanu didn't stop. He had never cared much for the Hollywood game. Fame, money, fake smiles, they meant nothing to him. But Alexandra, she meant everything. At home, Alexandra noticed the change in him. He seemed more serious, more focused. She asked him one night, "Why are you doing all this?" Keanu looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Because I never want you or anyone like you to feel that kind of pain again." His voice was quiet but full of fire. That night, Alexandra couldn't sleep. Her mind kept going back to everything that had happened. The event, the whispers, the photos, the comments, then the interview, the support, the kindness, and now. It was like her life had turned a corner. A painful corner, yes. But maybe, just maybe, something good could come from it. The next morning, she sat down at her desk and began to write. She wrote from the heart. Not as Keanu's partner, not as a victim, but as a woman. An artist. A person who had lived long enough to know how cruel the world could be. But also how beautiful. Her words were raw and honest. I didn't ask for the world to talk about me. I didn't ask for anyone's approval. I am not young. I am not trying to be. But I am strong. I am wise. I am alive. She talked about beauty real. Beauty, the kind that doesn't fade with age. The kind that grows with kindness, with courage, with love. Then, she shared the letter on her art website. At first, only a few people saw it. Then thousands. Then millions. Women from all over the world wrote back. Some were 20, some were 70. They shared their stories. Their shame, their struggles with trying to look perfect. Their quiet fights against feeling not enough. They thanked Alexandra. One message said, "You gave me the courage to stop hiding my gray hair." Another said, "For the first time, I feel proud to be myself." Alexandra read every single message, and each one made her stronger. Keanu watched her with pride. He didn't need to say anything. She could see it in his eyes. The woman who once sat in silence, holding back tears, was now leading a quiet, powerful movement. Not with anger, not with shouting, but with grace. And this was only the beginning. It had been 1 week since Keanu's interview, and Alexandra's open letter were shared with the world. But the impact kept growing. People didn't just move on to the next gossip story this time. Something about what Keanu said and what Alexandra wrote had touched a deep place in people's hearts. More celebrities began to speak up. Older actresses shared their own pain about being ignored or mocked for aging. Some even shared photos without makeup or filters, proudly showing wrinkles and gray hairs. Something rare was happening in the world of fame. People were starting to tell the truth. Meanwhile, Alexandra tried to stay out of the spotlight. She was never hungry for attention. All she ever wanted was to create, to paint, to write, to live simply with the man she loved. But the world kept watching her. Journalists waited outside her gallery. Reporters called, begging for interviews. Social media pages were filled with her name. She stayed quiet, calm, but strong. Then one day, she got an invitation. It came in a white envelope with gold writing. It was from a famous fashion and art magazine. They wanted her on the cover. Not because she was dating a movie star, but because she had started a real conversation about beauty, about age, about strength. At first, she didn't want to accept. She looked at Keanu and said, "I'm not a model. I'm not young. What do they want from me?" Keanu smiled. "Exactly what you are." After some thinking, Alexandra agreed, but only if she could control the message. No airbrushing, no filters, no false beauty tricks. She wanted to show her true self. If they couldn't accept that, she'd walk away. To her surprise, the magazine agreed. The day of the photo shoot came. Alexandra wore a soft linen dress, her long silver hair brushed gently behind her shoulders. She sat in front of a plain white wall, holding a book of poems she had written years ago. Her eyes were calm, her face gentle. There was no makeup hiding her age. No lights trying to make her look like someone else. And when the photos were published, they went viral again. But this time, the world didn't laugh. They clapped. People wrote, "Finally, someone real." This is the kind of beauty we need to see more of. She's not trying to be young. She's being herself, and it's powerful. Young girls, middle-aged women, grandmothers all wrote to Alexandra. One message said, "You made me. Stop hating the mirror." Another said, "I showed your photo to my daughter and said, 'Look, this is what courage looks like.'" Keanu saw the magazine and smiled. "Told you," he said. Alexandra laughed. But inside she was still in shock. Just weeks ago, she was being mocked. Now she was being respected. Not because she changed, but because she refused to. A few days later, Keanu and Alexandra went to another public event. It was a fundraiser for an art school. As they walked into the hall, people turned to look, but this time it was different. There were no whispers, no fake smiles. Just warmth. Some people walked up to her and said kind words. A woman in her 60s hugged Alexandra and said, "Thank you. You helped me feel proud of who I am again." Even younger women came to her, asking for advice, for guidance. They weren't just seeing her as Keanu's girlfriend. They were seeing her as someone with wisdom, with dignity, with power. But the moment that shocked Alexandra the most came during dinner. A speaker walked onto the stage. She was a young actress, just 28 years old, known for her beauty and fashion. She looked around the room and said, "Tonight, I don't want to talk about my career. I want to talk about someone who gave me courage." Then she looked straight at Alexandra. "When I saw people making fun of her, I stayed silent. I thought, that won't happen to me. I'm still young." But I was wrong. Because the truth is, all of us, no matter our age, are told we're not enough. She paused. But then, Alexandra Grant didn't fight back with anger. She didn't hide. She stood tall, gray hair and all. And because of her, I see beauty differently now. The entire room stood up and clapped. Alexandra sat frozen for a moment. Her eyes filled with tears. She hadn't expected any of this. She had simply lived her truth. But somehow that truth had touched people. Keanu leaned close and whispered, "They finally see what I've seen all along." And Alexandra, with her heart full and her hands shaking, smiled. Because in a world that tried to tear her down, love and honesty had lifted her higher than she ever imagined. Alexandra woke up to the soft morning light coming through the curtains. The house was quiet. Birds were singing outside the window. She sat up slowly, pulled the blanket around her, and looked out at the garden. Everything felt peaceful, but inside her heart, something was still changing. She had spent years living in the background. Not because she wasn't brave, but because she liked her peace. She liked quiet mornings, long walks, painting, and writing without anyone watching. But now, the world was watching her. Not just as Keanu's partner, but as a woman who stood tall in front of judgment. Her inbox was still full. Hundreds of messages from strangers, from old friends, from women she had never met but who felt connected to her now. Alexandra didn't answer every message, but she read each one with care. So many women had been hiding, just like she once did. Hiding their gray hairs, hiding their age, hiding their pain behind silence. Now they were starting to speak too. Keanu walked into the room holding 2 cups of coffee. He sat beside her and handed her one. "They want you to speak at a conference next month," he said softly. "Women in Art." Alexandra smiled and shook her head. "I'm not a speaker." "You are now," Keanu said, smiling. She looked at him. His eyes were kind, full of calm energy. She had always admired that about him. He never forced her to do anything. But when he believed in her, he made her believe in herself too. "Maybe," she said, sipping the warm coffee. Later that day, she visited her art studio. The room smelled of paint and wood. Large windows filled the space with sunlight. She hadn't painted much lately. Too many interviews, too many letters, too many thoughts. But now her fingers itched to hold a brush. She stood in front of a blank canvas and just stared. Then she picked up her favorite brush. For hours she painted. She didn't plan it. She just followed her feelings. Gray tones, soft blues, warm gold colors that felt like strength and sadness mixed together. By the time the sun was going down, a soft image had formed. A woman, not young, standing in front of a crowd with her eyes closed and head high. Alone, but strong. Alexandra looked at it and whispered, "That's me." That painting was later displayed at a small local gallery, but when people saw it, they started to cry. Not because it was sad, but because it was honest, real, and raw. The gallery owner, a woman in her 50s, hugged Alexandra after the show. "I've worked in art for 30 years, she said, "and I've never seen people connect to a painting like this." Alexandra thanked her, still surprised by the way people now saw her, no longer invisible. But not everything was perfect. One day, while out buying groceries, she heard someone whisper again, "She's only famous because of Keanu," a young woman said, looking at her. Alexandra paused. She could have ignored it. She could have smiled and walked away. But instead, she turned to the woman and said gently, "Maybe, but that doesn't change who I am." The young woman looked surprised, then lowered her eyes. Alexandra didn't need to argue. She had learned that her presence, her peace, was more powerful than any loud reply. That night, she told Keanu what happened. He didn't get angry. He just nodded. "Some people will always see what they want," he said. "But the ones who matter, they see the real you." They sat on the porch together as the stars came out. No cameras, no reporters. Just two people, side by side, with hands touching and hearts calm. Alexandra thought about the journey. From that humiliating night at the gala, to this quiet evening under the stars, so much had changed. But one thing never had: Keanu's love. It had been steady from the beginning, even when she doubted herself. She looked at him and said, "Thank you for standing up for me when I couldn't." Keanu looked into her eyes and answered, "You've always had a voice. You just needed the world to stop talking long enough to hear it." Alexandra felt tears in her eyes. But this time, they weren't from pain. They were from something else, something deeper. Something brighter. Hope. And even though she didn't know what the next chapter would bring, she was ready for it, because now, she wasn't afraid to be seen. Months passed, and the world kept moving, as it always did. New trends came, new faces appeared on screens, and fresh stories replaced the old ones. But Alexandra's story didn't fade. It stayed in people's hearts like a soft song, gentle but unforgettable. One day, a formal invitation arrived. It was from the same event where everything had started, that fancy gala where Alexandra had been humiliated. The same place where people had laughed behind her back, whispered rude things, and made her feel like she didn't belong. Alexandra looked at the envelope for a long time. She ran her fingers over the golden letters. Her heart beat a little faster. Why would they invite me again? She asked quietly. Keanu sat beside her, reading the invitation too. He smiled calmly. Maybe this time, they're ready to see you for who you are. She didn't answer right away. Part of her wanted to forget that night forever. But another part, stronger now, wanted to return, not to prove anything, but to stand in that same room again, this time without fear. I'll go, she said. On the night of the event, Alexandra stood in front of the mirror, getting ready. She didn't call a stylist, she didn't wear heavy makeup. She chose a simple black dress, soft and flowing. Her silver hair was loose, falling down her shoulders. She looked into her own eyes in the mirror and whispered, I am enough. Keanu walked in wearing a classic black suit. When he saw her, he stopped and smiled warmly. You look perfect, he said. Together, they walked out of the hotel and stepped into the car. As they drove toward the gala, Alexandra held Keanu's hand tightly. The roads were familiar, so was the building. But this time, something was different. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't pretending to be confident. She truly felt it. They arrived, and the crowd outside was buzzing. Cameras flashed, people shouted names. The red carpet was full of movement. But when Alexandra stepped out of the car, the crowd went silent for a moment. People stared, but not in the same way they had before. They didn't see a woman who looked too old or not beautiful enough. They saw Alexandra Grant, the woman who had stood up after being shamed. The woman who had changed hearts without shouting. The woman who had reminded the world what grace looked like. The camera flashes returned brighter now, but no one whispered insults. Reporters smiled kindly, asking gentle questions. Some even thanked her for her words, her strength, her art. Inside the ballroom, everything looked the same as before: golden lights, round tables, soft music. But Alexandra no longer felt like a stranger in the room. She walked in with her head high, her steps slow and sure. Some people came up to her, shaking her hand, giving her soft hugs. A few even apologized for how they had acted the year before. One woman, the same one who once joked about Alexandra's gray hair, walked over and said, "I'm sorry, I didn't see you back then. But I do now." Alexandra smiled gently. "Thank you for saying that." As they sat at their table, Keanu leaned toward her and whispered, "Look around." She did, and what she saw touched her deeply. At different tables around the room, she noticed other women who looked real, not all young, not all polished to perfection. Some had gray hair. Some wore simple clothes. They weren't hiding anymore. Alexandra realized she had become a quiet example, not just for those watching from afar, but even for the ones in the room. The evening went on. Speeches were made. Music played softly in the background. Then, just before dessert, the host of the event walked onto the stage with a microphone in hand. "Tonight," she said, "we honor someone who reminded us that beauty isn't always loud, young, or covered in glitter. Sometimes it's quiet, it's wise, it's brave." She turned toward Alexandra and smiled. "Alexandra Grant, would you please join us on stage?" The room clapped. Keanu gently squeezed her hand. Alexandra stood up slowly. Her heart beat hard. But she walked forward without fear. She climbed the steps and took the microphone with a calm smile. She looked at the crowd, the same crowd that had once judged her. She took a breath and said, "Last time I stood in this room, I felt invisible. I felt small. But tonight I don't. Not because I've changed, but because you have." The room went silent. "I didn't come here to be a symbol. I just came as myself. And I hope that's enough, because it should be." She paused then. "Finished. Let's stop trying to fix what was never broken. Let's stop teaching people to be ashamed of growing older, or being different, or not fitting in. Let's just be human." A deep silence followed. Then loud claps filled the room. Some people stood. Many wiped tears from their eyes. Alexandra stepped down and returned to her seat beside Keanu. He looked at her with love shining in his eyes. "You were brilliant," he whispered. Alexandra smiled, her heart full. She had returned to the very room where she was once humiliated, and this time, she left it as a queen. Weeks passed after the gala, but the moment Alexandra stood on that stage didn't fade. The video of her short speech was shared all over the internet. Millions of people watched her calm voice, her silver hair, her quiet strength. There were no loud words, no anger, just truth, spoken clearly. People began to write articles about her, not about her looks, not about her age, but about her message. She was called the voice of grace, the face of real beauty, and a quiet revolution. Alexandra didn't let the fame change her. She still woke up early, still took slow walks, still painted in silence. She didn't wear designer clothes or chase attention. She stayed the same, soft-spoken, thoughtful, full of kindness. But the world around her started to shift. Fashion brands, for the first time, began showing models with natural gray hair. Makeup companies launched campaigns called Real is Beautiful. TV shows started casting older women in strong, leading roles, not as jokes or grandmothers, but as heroes, lovers. Thinkers. One magazine even called the movement the Alexandra effect. Alexandra didn't ask for any of this. She never wanted to be a symbol. But something about her story touched people deeply. She had been judged unfairly. She had been mocked. But instead of hiding, she had stood tall, and in doing so, she gave others permission to stand too. One afternoon, she received a package at home. Inside was a handmade book. It was filled with hundreds of handwritten letters from women around the world. Young women, mothers, artists, teachers, grandmothers. Each one shared a small story. One letter read, "I used to be scared to leave the house without makeup, but now I walk freely. Thank you." Another said, "I'm 61. I just dyed my hair gray on purpose for the first time. I've never felt more beautiful." Alexandra sat by the window and read each letter with tears in her eyes. These weren't just fans. They were souls like hers who had once felt unseen. And now they felt strong. Later that evening, she and Keanu sat on the porch, holding hands, watching the sky turn pink. "I never thought so much would come from one night," Alexandra said quietly. "It didn't come from one night," Keanu said. "It came from your whole life, from how you've always carried yourself." She looked at him, smiling. "You were the first to see me." He shook his head gently. "You just needed someone to remind you how much you already shine." There was peace in that moment. No cameras, no applause, just the quiet sound of wind in the trees and hearts that understood each other. Alexandra had once feared being judged. She had once believed she needed to hide. But now she had stepped into her truth. And because of that, the world had shifted a little. She wasn't just Keanu Reeves' partner anymore. She was Alexandra Grant, the artist, the writer, the woman who reminded the world that beauty doesn't fade with time. It grows deeper. Soon after, a university invited her to give a talk not about love, not about being a celebrity's partner, but about her art, her ideas, her books. Finally, people wanted to hear her voice, not because of who she was with, but because of who she was. And when she stood at that podium, in a room full of young people, she spoke gently but firmly. "You don't have to become someone else to be worthy," she said. "You don't have to be loud to be strong. You don't have to be young to be beautiful. The world will try to tell you otherwise. But you must learn to listen to your own voice. Trust it. Honor it." The students clapped. Some cried. Later, a young girl walked up to her and said, "I want to grow up to be like you." Alexandra knelt down, took the girl's hand, and replied, "No, my dear. Grow up to be like you. That's where the real magic is." At home, she painted again. Her work was different, now more open, more alive. Not because she had changed as an artist, but because she was no longer holding back. She had been humiliated once, but she had risen, and in rising, she had carried others with her. Keanu often watched her from the doorway as she painted. Sometimes he didn't say anything. He didn't have to. His eyes were full of pride, full of love. They didn't need to go to every event. They didn't chase headlines. They lived quietly, but fully. They built a life full of honesty and peace. And though many years would pass, people would still remember the woman with silver hair and gentle eyes who walked into a room full of judgment and walked out having changed the world.